Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Microsoft Reactor session entitled Take Your First Steps with C#. Great to be here with you today. Excited to spend the next 60 minutes talking C# and sort of entry into that language. And could be that you are already coding in one or more languages and you want to add C# to your repertoire, or it could be that this is your first foray into programming. Either way, it's great to have you here and really looking forward to spending these next few moments with you walking through this material. A little bit about the reactors real quick. The reactors are an opportunity for community members like us, right, to meet in community spaces where we can talk technology, right? So we can connect, we can network, we can learn from one another, which is awesome. Ton of different topics, a ton of different technologies that are covered off in these sessions. And so, as we are working together to walk through this, environment of innovation, it's great to have an opportunity to get together and really benefit from each other's experience. So great to have you here. One of the great things about the reactors are that we have availability in multiple countries across the globe. So a lot of options. Hopefully at some point we'll get past this pandemic and be able to start to travel again and meet in person. But as it stands for now, we have virtual sessions like this, which give us a chance to connect from all over the world. So welcome once again to each of you. And our session today is going to be Take Your First Steps with C#. A little bit about me. Excuse me. My name is Alan Sanders. I am a senior cloud architect, and I've been in architecture, development, and design for about 25 plus years. I've worked in several verticals, finance, insurance. I worked at some large companies. I worked at some small companies, and I've done quite a bit of technology consulting. But the one thing that I want you to know about me is that I'm passionate for learning, right? My own and others. And that's one of the great things about this industry, this field. There's always going to be something new to learn, right? I don't ever anticipate waking up one morning and saying, hey, I've learned all there is to know. There are no more challenges to tackle, right? That's what's great about technology, is there is constant innovation, and so there is constant opportunity to keep things fresh. So I'm passionate about my own learning. It's key and critical to my own career, and I'm passionate about others as well. So I'm really glad you're here. I'm looking forward to walking through this material together. Okay. Couple of housekeeping items. We are actually going to be sort of doing some paired programming, right, or some module walkthroughs of some modules in Microsoft Learn. Okay, so what I want to do first is post into as an announcement into our window the link for this particular session. You can go ahead and click that link, and this will be an opportunity for you to follow along with me as we walk through this material. So that's kind of cool. The second housekeeping item I want to draw your attention to is the Q&A, right? So as we are proceeding through this material, if you have a question, please post it to the Q&A, and we will get a chance to kind of take a look and either answer it as it comes in, or maybe as we have a pause in our time together. So if you've clicked that link, you should find yourself here in Microsoft Learn, this particular learning path entitled, again, Take Your First Steps with C#. Microsoft Learn is a great platform from my perspective, because it provides you the opportunity to combine documentation, sort of context-aware documentation around a specific subject. There are a ton of technologies covered, and then there are exercises or tutorials that you can walk through as you kind of proceed through the documentation. One of the cool things, I think it's kind of fun, right, is you can earn experience points. And then with those experience points, you can achieve badges, which again, just gives you a way to sort of chart your journey as you proceed through your learning. So We're going to be working on this together, and make sure that you take an opportunity to kind of follow along with me, because I think that will keep this sort of interactive and fresh. And that's what I want it to be. I want it to be interactive, and I want you to get a lot out of this. And we're going to be talking about take your first steps with C#, right? C# is a huge language, right? There are a ton of things you can do with it. C# is one of the more popular languages. You can use C# for pretty much any type of application or application profile. And so there's a lot there, right? Obviously, a ton more than we're going to be able to cover off in 60 minutes. But what we're looking to do today is to provide you with a good foundation, and then, sort of provide you with some links that you can then continue your learning. As I said, if this is your, second or third language, great. If this is your first language, even better, right? So let's go ahead and get started. So Microsoft Learn, as I said, has modules. This particular learning path has 8 modules. We're going to try to get through 2 to 3 of them within the hour that we have. But as we walk through these, again, you're going to see sort of opportunities to follow along. There will be some documentation to sort of explain things. Obviously, we're not going to read that line by line. I'm going to summarize it, but then we're going to look for opportunities to work on the exercises together. So what I'm going to have you do is, if you go down to this first module, write your first C# code. Let's jump right into this exercise link. Now, a couple of things I want to mention. Often when we do development, like with C#, we will use something called an IDE, or an integrated development environment, which is a separate program that we install, and then we write our code there, and it has compilers associated to it, and can verify our code. We'll talk about compilers in a bit here. In this particular case, right, we don't really have time to install an IDE. Thankfully, the Microsoft Learn platform gives us a .NET editor right here in browser. And so we're going to practice our exercises right here in the browser. We see an output window, a run button. You'll see how this sort of operates shortly. But I do want to at least draw your attention to Visual Studio Code, which from my perspective is one of the better integrated development environments. And I'm going to post this link into the chat. Again, don't look to install this now, right? Because we're going to be proceeding with exercises, but I wanted to draw your attention to that and make that available to you. There are versions of Visual Studio Code available for Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. The great thing about Visual Studio Code is you can add extensions, right? So depending on the language that you are working in, if it's C#, for example, you can add extensions to your environment that will facilitate development in C#. Or if it's Python, same thing, right? So after this, as you continue your journey into C#, I really want to encourage you to take a look at Visual Studio Code. But for now, we are going to sort of focus our efforts right here in the .NET editor. So first thing we're going to do is we're just going to type a simple statement to output some text. So I'm going to type console.write line hello world. Now you notice these red squigglies, right? As I type this, I might click run to try to execute, and it turns out we have a ton of errors in our code. That's okay, right? All we have to do is just repair what's wrong, and then we can proceed. I did this on purpose, though, just to sort of draw your attention to a couple of nuances about C#. One of them is case sensitivity, right? C# is case sensitive. Lowercase c console is different than an uppercase C console. So you need to be aware of that, right? Case matters in C#. Data types matter in C#. So in this particular case, I've got hello world, which is intended to be just a set of text that I want to output, but I've got it enclosed in single quotes. When C# sees single quotes, it thinks character, single character, right? if you put more than one character between the single quotes, it's going to give you an error. It's going to say, hey, this is the wrong data type, right? You're trying to print out what's called a string, right? A string of text, but instead you're trying to represent it as a single character. So a couple of fixes here. I can go through, change this to a capital C. Right line is actually a capital W and a capital L. The nice thing about this editor here and IDEs are IntelliSense, which will help you autocomplete the correct format and version of the code that you're trying to execute. I'm going to change this to a double quote. And the last thing for C# that you should know is it uses semicolons to end its statements, right? That's how you close out a statement in C#, is with a semicolon. So after having done that, all my red squigglies go away, right? Which are really indicators of errors. Now, if I type run, I should see my message, right? Hello world. So that's your first sort of introduction to C#. That's your first line of C# code. If you're following along, congratulations. You've written some C# and now you're able to run it and output text to the screen. So let's take just another look at a couple of other things. And again, I'm going to sort of reference these instructions on the side, but rather than read them, we are going to kind of work on them together. All right. Just because of time constraints. Definitely encourage you to go back and read the information and walk through the information in more detail. But for the purposes of our paired programming session, I'm going to sort of provide commentary as we go. So console.writeLine is one way to output text, right? I'm going to comment out this statement, and the way you comment out a statement is you can put 2 forward slashes in front of it and it turns green. Right? And that's a way of telling C# that I don't want you to consider this line of code, right? Don't execute this, ignore it. It is basically what we're saying here. And we're going to output some text using another format or another method, let's say. Okay, so we've got 3 string literals, right, or 3 blocks of text that we want to output here. And so if I run this, we'll see that text on the screen in the output window, right? But kind of strange, it's all on the same line. Why? Well, that's because we used console.write. So console.writeLine is going to output the text that you provided in the parentheses, and then it's going to move your cursor to the next line in anticipation of the next set of text that you want to output. Console.write is going to output the text you provide in the parentheses, but leave the cursor there on that same line to accept new input, which in this case is a space. We use console.write, leaves the cursor on that line, and then we output the last line. And so console.write can be used to string together a set of text, right, in pieces, all on the same line. Console.writeLine allows you to output information and then move to the next line in preparation for more output. So let's go ahead and keep moving. Let's talk a little bit about what's happening behind the scenes here. All right, so we've got an ability now to output text a couple of different ways, right, in C#. Talking about how it works. So real quickly, right, what are programming languages? Well, programming languages are really just rules, types, sets of code, right, sets of types of code that we can use, right, to create human readable instructions for a computer, right? It's the language we use to code in, And there are different languages, just like, there are different spoken languages, there are different programming languages. But the point of programming languages is they allow us to create code in a manner that is more human readable and easier for us to go back and reinterpret. Okay. Well, this human readable format, really, the computer doesn't understand this, right? In its most simplest terms or simplistic terms, the computer wants it in binary, zeros and ones. And so we need a way to convert this human readable format into something that the computer understands, right? That's where compilers come into play. Compilers allow you to build your code and then, validate that you are adhering to the rules of the language, can optimize your code, right? Because we might have a bunch of extra spaces or, extra blank lines in our code. Computer doesn't need that, right? The computer can have that optimized down to the smallest size possible because it's still able to read it and understand it. And then by compiling, we're able to prepare code for either execution immediately or for deployment elsewhere, execution at a later time. So one of the things that the compiler does is enforce syntax rules, right? Syntax for a programming language is really the grammar rules, right, for that language, if you will. There are different compilers for different languages, and those compilers have syntax rules, just like with spoken and written languages, right? So the syntax rules are basically the rules about what is good code in that language versus what is not good, right? What is missing something. And in order for the computer to be able to translate this from a human readable format to the binary format for that particular language, it needs to be able to understand it, right? And for the computer to understand it, it needs to adhere to the syntax rules for that information. Okay. Any questions or comments as we're proceeding? Definitely, please leverage that Q&A window because definitely want you to feel like you can, get those questions out there if you need to. So a couple of additional things here we're going to talk about, just sort of as background or foundation. There are classes in C#, and then there are objects, instances of classes, there are methods. So let's talk about what each one of those things means. For a class, best sort of simplest way for me to think about a class is a cookie cutter. So with a cookie cutter, that's the template that we're going to punch into Do for creating new cookies, right? Now the cookie cutter is not a cookie, right? We're not going to eat the cookie cutter. And I know this is oversimplified, but just bear with me. It helps me to sort of, keep it straight in my mind. That cookie cutter is not going to be, we're not going to eat the cookie cutter. That's the template that we use to create new cookies, right? So the cookie cutter is the class, and then we can use that class to create new instances, objects, right? Or new cookies in this case. Now, classes have attributes, right? The cookie concept or template might have the idea of whether or not there are sprinkles, right? Might have the idea of what color icing is going to be on the cookie, right? Those types of things we can vary with each instance, right? When I punch out a new cookie, that one can have sprinkles and maybe green icing. When I punch out a second cookie, that one maybe does not have sprinkles and has blue icing, right? So that's the idea of attributes associated to classes, which are, the data about that, the properties of that thing, of something created from that class. Well, the other thing that classes can have are methods, right? Which are actions that either that objects of that class can take or that can be taken upon that instance. So why did I go into all of that, sort of bakery 101? Because console is a class. Console is a class provided by the .NET framework. Write or write line are methods of that class. And then when we call methods, we might provide arguments for parameters, which are inputs to the method so that we can vary how it operates dynamically at runtime. Now, in this particular case, something a little different here. Write and WriteLine are actually static methods, which means they belong to the class, not the instances of the class. So, write and WriteLine in this case belong to the cookie cutter, not to cookies that we're creating with it, right? But there can be methods that are actually leverageable by instances. And again, obviously, you're going to want to continue sort of your study, I hope, on C# as you proceed. You'll come across more of that information and be able to drill into that a little deeper. But in this case, really the idea is we have a class with a method that can take arguments that allow us to execute some function, right, that we didn't write, right? I don't have to take care of all of the machinations and the idiosyncrasies of outputting text to the output window. I can just use this method that handles all the details. Okay. Any questions or comments? Again, please leverage that Q&A window. All right, let's go ahead and look at a challenge, right? So one of the nice things or cool things about Microsoft Learn is that there are challenges available. So if you've been following along, first of all, remove whatever code you might have in the window there. And what we are going to look to do here is the challenge is to output, this is the first line, and this is the second line, using some combination, right, of WriteLine and write. So you want to use both of those methods to output two different lines of text. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to move my screen off to the side here to give you just a couple of minutes, right? We're not going to, unfortunately, we don't have a whole lot of time, but I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to try this yourself while I work on it as well. And if you get stuck, the solution is available, or I'm going to walk through a quick solution here in just a bit. But really think about it and try to give it a go. Because the thing with programming is it's practice, 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 right? You have to continue to try, you have to continue to learn, you have to continue to test things. You wonder if something works, you might try it, find out that it doesn't, and that leads you down the path of learning, exactly how to sort of tweak it so that it does work. I'm almost done here. Okay, let's come back. How did you do? All right. Here's what I did, right? I used console.WriteLine for the first line of text. Excuse me. And then I used console.write for piecing together the second line of text. Now notice here with console.write, if you're concatenating all this together into a single line, you have to be aware of spacing, right? Where are spaces? Where do spaces need to be placed in this output, right? In the string that we're trying to ultimately present on the screen. Notice here that I've split across a word. Well, C# doesn't care that this is a word, right? C# doesn't know that it's a word. It just knows it's two sets of text to be pieced together. So you can certainly do that. One additional item that I will, sort of call out here is if I were to write console.WriteLine, if I run this, I can get the third line of text output, but it's sort of sitting on the end of the second line. Why? Well, that's because I used write all the way through here, right? Write is going to output this text, this is, and then leave the cursor there for the next set of text, right? So often what I'll do is if I'm piecing together one set of strings this way, for the last one, I will use WriteLine so that the INE dot gets output, and then we move to a new line for the next set of output. When I do that, then I get the expected result. Okay, So again, solution, you can kind of walk through this solution to see how they did it. There are also knowledge checks here that we're not going to have, or may not have a chance to go through during our time together. So I'm going to hold off on those. If we have time, we'll loop back to them, but we may not. Certainly, as you're working your way through this separately, and maybe further as you move past our time together here today, please take advantage of these knowledge checks, because they are great opportunities to just sort of zero in on sort of understanding about a particular topic. Okay, so I'm going to click this Take Your First Steps with C# link again to go back sort of to the beginning. And I'm going to move now down to the second module, which is store and retrieve data using literal and variable values in C#. So let's navigate into that module. And we're going to go and jump down right to this second link, the unit entitled Exercise Literal Values. Let's go ahead and open that up. So literal values are basically hard-coded sets of data that are going to stay the same in our code, right? When we put them in the code as a literal value, that's the value it's going to have until we change the source code and rebuild, right? There are multiple types of literal values. We've seen literal strings already, right, in the set of exercises we just completed. But there are other types of literal values as well. Why? Because C# has other data types, right? Their data information that we work with can have a type, right? And there are basic or sort of foundational types that C# provides. And then there are more complex types, right? So simple types, complex types. And with C# we can actually create our own types, which is kind of cool. But let's take a little bit of a look here at some of the different types we have available to us, and we're going to do that with a couple of a few write lines. Okay, console.writeline B, and you'll notice I have single quotes. Single quotes around a single character, those are valid, right? Because this is a character data type. C# sees this and recognizes it as a character or char literal. So if I do that, I can output the letter B. Not super interesting, right? But now we can start to get into some other data types, right? Like integer, which are whole numbers, right? So this is an int or integer literal, right? 1, 2, 3. We can run that, and we see that we're able to output that information. We may have numbers that include decimal points, right? Like 12.9. And I'll talk about this in momentarily. But here, if I wanted to output a decimal literal, right, I could do this. The reason for the M in this particular case is because C# actually has a couple of different types to represent numbers with decimal points, right? In this case, we want C# to consider this value, 12.9, of a specific type called decimal, which can be a little confusing, right? But the type, the data type in C# is decimal. And we signify that to C# by appending an M, either lowercase or uppercase M, as in Mary, to that number. And that forces C# to see this as a type decimal. The decimal data type has some improved formatting, improved precision, which makes it a great data type for financial applications, if you're processing dollar values, etc. Decimal is a great type for that. So that's a decimal literal. And then let's look at one more, Boolean or bool, which is basically represented by two different options. It's true or false, right? A Boolean value can have one of two values, true or false. And here we're just going to output a Boolean true right? This Boolean literal, and this is another Boolean literal. When I run this, we get, our output. Now you might notice something here a little interesting. I output true, right, with a lowercase t, but it appeared in my output with an uppercase t. What happened, right? Why did it do that? The reason is because console.writeLine actually only works with strings, right? It only knows how to output strings ultimately. So console.writeLine could have forced anybody using it to have to convert their data to a string in order to output it. Or in this particular case, what console.writeLine does is it actually handles the conversion to a string for me behind the scenes, right? So with each one of these, what's actually happening under the covers is a call to the toString method. When I run this, I get the exact same output, but the toString method for Booleans takes the value either true or false and ends up capitalizing it for its string version. So the other thing, excuse me, in terms of data types that we might want to consider, data types are important because depending on what we're trying to do with the information, whether it's output only or calculation, could dictate what type of data we use to represent that information, right? If it's a calculation, we're probably going to use a number. And C# again is pretty strict about data types, which is a good thing, right? It sort of helps protect you from yourself. I'll give you an example. If I did console.writeLine 1, 2, 3, sorry, 1, 2, 3, right? Looks like I want to add together two numbers, 123 and 42. But when I run it, what I'm actually going to get is a concatenation of those values. Why? Because C#, this plus operator, C# is able to determine from the types of data that you're adding what you want to do. It can vary what plus means depending on the data type, right? In this case, when C# sees that you're trying to add together two string literals, it's not going to add them from a mathematical perspective. It's going to stick them together, right? Concatenate. Versus if I were to write console.writeLine 1, 2, 3 plus 4, 2. When I run that one, I actually get, what I might have expected with the first case, right? The actual addition of those two numbers. Because when C# sees two integers that you're attempting to operate on with a plus sign, it knows that that means add the two numbers together. Okay? Any questions or comments? All right, let's go ahead and start talking about variables, which are a really important construct in C#. So I'm going to get rid of this code. Now I'm going to declare a variable. So what are variables? Variables are simply named memory locations in which we can place data for temporary storage and then retrieve for use later, right? And by temporary storage, I mean while the program is running, right? It's volatile storage. As we're creating these variables, we're isolating sections of memory. We're saying, okay, I want to reserve this, call it first name, and now when I reference it, I can put something there, right? It's like a box that I can stick something into, and then later, if I want the contents, I can pull the contents out of that box and use them. Variables include a data type and a name. And let's talk a little bit about some naming rules and conventions for variables in C#. So some of the rules are you can use alphanumeric characters, letters and numbers, or you can use underscores, right, in your variables. You can't use $signs or hashtags, for example, in C#. Excuse me. Variable names have to begin with an an alphabetical character, right? A letter or an underscore. You can't start your variable names with a number. Variable names shouldn't be C# reserved keywords, right? So I shouldn't have a variable named string, right? Because string is known by C# as a data type. Variable names, just like everything else in C#, are case sensitive, right? So first name with capital N is different than first name with a lowercase n. And in fact, you could declare two variables in those formats, right? And C# would see them as different. That would be confusing for someone who's trying to read the code, or for yourself if you're going back to read. But just keep that in mind. Variable names should be descriptive, right? Don't do that for your variable name, right? X. Because when I see X later in my code, right, maybe far down in my code, it's going to be hard for me to get the context of what X is supposed to represent, right? I don't really know what X means. If I use a more descriptive name like first name and last name, then when you encounter this variable later, right, it might make more sense, right? You might have a sense of, now there's nothing that guarantees, right, that this variable holds a first name and a last name, right? But at least as you're reading the code, you can get the intent of the author, right? And again, creating code is one thing, maintaining code is a whole nother animal, right? And so you might be maintaining other people's code, or you might even be maintaining your own after a while. So the more readable it is and the more context you can give yourself, it makes it easier longer term. Variable names typically use and should use camel case for their formatting. So in this particular case, a camel case means it starts with a lowercase letter, and then each word, right, we can piece together words as long as we don't put any spaces there to make up the variable name. Each word after that is uppercase. So that's the camel, right? Here's the camel's head, here are the camel's humps. And then one other thing to keep in mind is used to be that the convention was to do this, right? That you would include a 3-character sort of designator at the beginning of your variable name to reflect what data type is being stored there. Since, and that was a while ago, now the general best practice is to not do that. Right? Just use regular words. Okay, so let's go ahead and continue on. Let's talk about setting and getting variables. Variable values. So I'm going to delete that code. I'm going to start with string first name, and I'm going to set first name equal to Alan. It says Bob, and I'm going to use Alan. Right? So what we're doing here is we're declaring a variable, right? We're identifying a block of memory that we want to give a name to. And in the second line, we are putting something in that memory location, right? We're sticking contents in that box. In this case, it's the string Alan. Now, we have to be sort of careful, right? And aware in terms of how we're writing this code. For example, if I decided to do it this way, which from a mathematical perspective might seem valid, for C# it's not. The way the C# operator works is anything on the right-hand side of the equal sign is evaluated, and then the results are assigned to what's on the left-hand side. In this particular case, it says, hey, the left-hand side needs to be something that I can assign to, right? This is just a constant. It's a string literal, so I can't change that. I can't assign anything to it, right? So the order is going to matter. Okay. The other thing to keep in mind is data types. If for some reason, this would be bad practice, but if for some reason a variable named first name was actually of type int, which again, that would be a bad naming convention, but still valid C#, right? If that's the case, right, first name is declared as type int, then I can't store anything except the int there, right? If I try to store a string literal, it's going to say cannot implicitly convert type string to int. Similarly, if I left that as string and tried to store an int there, it's going to tell me something similar, right? Cannot implicitly convert type int to string. C#, the compiler is going to enforce data types like that, right? It's going to make sure that the data you're assigning to variables is valid for the type that it is intended to hold. So just keep that in mind as you proceed. Now, you might notice here this little green squiggly. So if I run this, I'm not going to get any errors down here, right? It's not sort of the scary red squiggly, maybe. That scares me anyway. But it's a green squiggly. So the green squiggly means, it basically means, hey, you got something going on here. It's not going to prevent you from running the code, but you really should fix it. And what is it? Well, here it's saying, look, you have assigned this variable a value, but you're never using it, right? You're never using this value. All we're doing here in this code is identifying or isolating a set of memory for temporary usage, calling it first name, sticking contents in it, and then moving on, right? It's never used. So it's saying, hey, look, if this is the case, either get rid of the variable, you're not going to use it, right? Or use it, right? It could be a problem there. And that's just about helping you keep your code clean, which is valuable from a maintenance perspective. So if I come down here and type console.writeline first name, now the green squiggly goes away, and I'm able to actually utilize that variable, right? So I put contents in the box, and then here I pull the contents out and output them, right? All right. Once we have this variable, we can actually reassign it, right? So I'm going to copy these two lines of text, these two lines of code, and I am going to paste them, okay? And then I'm going to change this to Melissa. So what we're doing here is declaring a variable of type string. We're assigning it the value Alan and then outputting whatever value it holds. Because it's a variable, I can vary its value, right? Hence the name. I can change the value of this variable to Melissa. And then when I output the variable, it's going to give me the new contents. Similarly for Bob, so when I run this, each time, right, I'm going to get a different output because I've assigned a different value to that variable. Initialization is key. The last thing that we'll sort of talk about here. If I comment out this line, then I'm going to get a red squiggly here that says, hey, you're attempting to use a variable that hasn't been given a value, right? You've identified a memory location, you've given it a name, now you're trying to use the contents, but you haven't put any contents in it, right? You haven't put anything in it. You're trying to pull something out that doesn't exist, right? So sometimes to sort of help get around that, what we might do is actually initialize it at the time of declaration. That is valid syntax as well. So in this particular case, I'm declaring and initializing in the same line of code, and then I continue to use it the same way. Any questions or comments, please feel free to leverage the Q&A. Let's go ahead and move now to implicitly typed variables. All right, I do see one question. Can you recommend any books on C#, please? I am going to recommend, there are a ton of books on C#, but I am going to, at the end, provide you some links to Channel 9 video series and to sort of Microsoft documentation for C#. Those are good places to start. As far as books go, there are so many that, you know, I don't have any specific one that I use. But if you, if you have an O'Reilly or, Amazon, do a search for C#, you can, find books that are geared towards beginners or intermediate or advanced. The Channel 9 series I'm going to share with you has videos at C# 101, but then there's an advanced series that you can move to as well after. Thanks for that question. Great question. And again, I think to me that question says, look, I know that there's going to be more to learn after this, and that's good, right? That's not bad. That's a good thing. Let's go ahead and move to implicitly typed local variables. Let me remove this code. Let me create a new variable called var message equals hello world. You see this word var, the syntax var. What does that mean? Well, var is intended to, it's a shortcut, right? It's what's sometimes called syntactic sugar in, in the language that allows us to, sort of forego typing until the time of assignment. So in this particular case, message is going to be a string, but it's going to be a string not because we have, declared it as a string, but because we've assigned the string literal to it, right? So var allows C# to infer the data type from the value that we assign, right? And to see this, if I turn around then and attempt to say message equals 10.0m, it's going to give me an error, right? It's going to say, hey, you cannot implicitly convert type decimal to string. Now, I didn't declare this as a string, but because I assigned it a string value, that is, the data type that is given. And then I can turn around and reuse that. Run it, right? And if I type console write line message, there's a method defined by all types in C#. I'll get type. If I run that, you can see that it is a string, but that variable type is string, which would be all right. So why do we use the var keyword? Well, I covered it off here because you're going to see it in a lot of code. If you have a chance to explore other people's code, you're going to come across it, right? The other thing is it's used sometimes because we may not exactly know what the type's going to be until we dynamically run. And so this gives us the ability to leverage some anonymous typing in C#, which is a little bit more advanced concept, but still good to have some exposure to. Because as you read C#, you may very well likely see this syntax in the code. All right. Let's go to the next challenge. Excuse me. We're going to remove any text, or I'm sorry, any code that we have in the window already. And what we're going to do is declare 3 variables of appropriate type, assign them these values, and then use those variables and string literals to output this formatted text. So I'm going to move my screen over here to give you a couple of minutes to try it yourself. I'll work on it myself as well, and then we'll come back together shortly. Now, again, if you feel like you're getting stuck, you can navigate to the solution, but we're going to walk through that shortly here as well. So take a couple of minutes to try this out. Be aware of spacing and where punctuation, etc., as you're looking to output this information. Being done here. I'm going to give you a little bit of time still. How's it going? Hopefully well. All right, let's see how you did. What I've done here, and again, there are multiple ways to implement this, but what I've done is I declared 3 variables. I used the implicit typing, first name, inbox count, and temperature in Celsius. This is going to be a string, an int, and a decimal because of the M here you see. And then I just use a series of console.write statements to output each of the piece of this. Now you might recognize that this is a little onerous to do this, right? It's like a lot of sort of information that we have to do, a lot of lines of text to get this single line of code output. We're going to talk about that in just a bit, a way to sort of get around that. But you can see here that we're able to output our information. Hello, Bob. You have 3 in your inbox, and the temperature is 34 Celsius. Now, there's formatting you can do, which we're going to talk about in a bit, to make it look like dollar signs and percent values, etc. But this hopefully gives you a little bit of an opportunity to see some of that usage of variable declaration, assignment, and then using of the variable values. Again, please leverage Q&A if you have questions or comments. Again, I'm going to skip the knowledge check because we just are running out of time. What I'm going to do is click take your first steps with C# to go back home. And now we're going to jump down to this third module, perform basic string formatting in C#. So if we open that one and navigate to the first exercise, we can talk about escape sequences. So let's talk about character escape sequences. So there's a lot here that I'm going to encourage you to go back and read, but what I might want to do is output something like this. All right. A lot of weird sort of syntax going on here. Let's talk about what's happening. Let me run this, make sure it runs correctly. And so now we can kind of see the hello reactors message, welcome on a different line. Your home directory is C:\home. What's going on here? Well, if I want to be able to include double quotes within my output, right, I have to do what's called escaping that, right? I have to indicate or mark that as intended to be part of the output. If I don't use the backslash to escape it, then C# isn't going to know where the string begins and ends, right? It thinks the string ends here and it doesn't recognize the rest of this code. By putting a backslash in front of that quote, I'm able to indicate that I want a quote output in my result. This \n is an escape sequence for a new line. So even though I didn't do a new line, a separate write line statement, by using the \n, I'm able to do a new line, and then \t a couple of times is a tab. And then the last one here is on the home directory. I want to be able to show a backslash, and because backslash is the escape character, right? If I don't include 2 here, it's going to be like I don't recognize \H as an escape character, right? So if I want to use this in my output, I need to escape the backslash. And by doing this, it gives me an opportunity to sort of format information the way I want it to appear. Now, one of the things that we can do here is we can use something called the verbatim syntax. In the verbatim syntax, to do that, we use an @ sign. And with that, we can get rid of the escapes. Verbatim syntax says, take it as is, right? Take it I want you to output it exactly the way it appears here, right? Now you'll see we've got something going on here, right? It doesn't recognize, right, the escaped quote now. Why? Because we have said we're going verbatim, right? Don't use this, and so now it sees this quote and still doesn't know where the string ends. If you're using verbatim syntax, you can simply use two quotes. When you use double quotes, now when I run, right, I'm going to get the same output, but instead of providing escape sequences for a new line or tab, I just type that information in the output, and the verbatim syntax says recognize this and output it as you see it. Same thing with the directory, right? I no longer need to escape my backslash because the verbatim syntax says just output it the way you see it. Okay, so that's something to be aware of. You might come in contact with. The other thing that you might come in contact with are Unicode characters. And so real quick, I'm going to copy this code, clear this out because we're just about out of time. Let me run or paste this. Here you're going to see different instances of the same thing that we just did, right? Quotes, new lines, tabs, verbatim for the directory. But here Unicode is a way to represent characters in a code format, right? And so for each one of these characters, I can use its Unicode format. Now there's Unicode for the standard language, the cultural language that you're using. But if I want to be able to output characters in other languages, then Unicode gives me the ability to do that, right? And so I can output these Unicode characters with Japanese, right? I just want to show one other thing, and that's interpolation. I'm going to go back to interpolation. I could do console.write console.write space console.write first name. I would get allow. Well, depending on how much text you have, this could get pretty long, right? It would be nice if we could do this in a much more concise manner. Do something called string interpolation, we can, by putting a $sign in front of the string. I can actually use variables in line. Now, when I run this, you get the same output, but it's a much more concise format, right? I can sort of create my string literal or the format that I want, and then plug in variables at different spots, which just makes it a lot easier to read. That's the string interpolation, which is keyed off of this $sign. We are just about out of time. Ton of material to try to get through. Let's talk next steps as we sort of wrap up. So what did we cover? We looked at output using write and write line. We talked about data types and variables. We talked about implicitly typed variables. And then we talked about string formatting, concatenation, and interpolation. Where do we go from here, right? Next steps. I would definitely recommend that you continue to take advantage of the rest of the modules in this learning path, right? Start back from the beginning if you want, walk all the way through, or finish the rest of the modules on your own. Again, that's a great thing to do. Again, let me just put this link, publish this here for you to have again. The other thing, this was the Channel 9 C# 101 series that I was talking about. It's a series of videos that you might find very useful. So leverage that set of videos to help you on your journey into C#. And then the C# documentation. That here as well. Take a look at those links and use that information. Look at code, right? Look at a lot of code. Look at a lot of practice, right? Practice. Don't be afraid to try things, right? If things don't work, leverage Bing to find the answer, or Google to find the answer, and then leverage this documentation to sort of help you walk through it. Let's go ahead and let me draw your attention real quick. Thank you for your time. It's been a tremendous opportunity to spend time with you. I would like to draw your attention to the survey link, as Hassan already posted. Please fill out that survey and use 11650 as the event code. That gives you an opportunity to tell us what kinds of things you would like to cover during these reactor sessions. And it's your way of helping us make these even more effective for the technology community. Community members, great spending time with you, great being with you. It was a tremendous opportunity. Thanks to Sam. He posted the link in the chat again. Great opportunity to be with you. Really appreciate your time. Hope you learned a lot. Hope you set a good foundation, and I hope your journey into C# just sort of rockets from here. Thanks a lot, and have a great rest of your day.